diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Chris Pereira, and I'll be moderating the session today. I have almost 20 years of payroll and HR administration experience. This includes managing and directing human capital management systems, managing implementation and service, as well as business process outsourcing of end-to-end HR and payroll. I hold certifications from SHRM and HRCI, as well as a certification as a project management professional with PMI. I have over a decade of experience training HR and admin professionals in various webinars, conferences, and seminars. Little housekeeping for the webinar. Everybody will be muted, so please use the chat box to ask any questions. If there's something that comes to mind during the presentation, go ahead and put it in the chat box. That way we can pull that up at the end of the webinar when we have questions and answers. There are a few poll questions today. We ask that you please participate, and of course, we'll share the results with you. Just a little disclaimer, this presentation is certainly not legal advice. Before you administer any program in your own organizations and shops, please seek legal advice or your local counsel. Today's topic is not the final word on the topic. This is just some elements of DEI that we're discussing today. So keep in mind, there may be things that we may not cover today based on the time frame that we have. And then lastly, this is not a political opinion. Today's webinar is good for one PDC for both HRCI and SHRM. We recommend that you log into your portals regularly and add your PDCs with the approved activity number that's going to be provided with your certificate. If you have any questions about recertification, please visit the SHRM or HRCI websites, or you can email me directly at chrisb@hubengage.com. All participants are recorded electronically, and their total time participating is documented. Full participation is required. Each participant will receive both an HRCI and a SHRM certificate for attending with the required information and activity ID for CE credit. So welcome to today's webinar on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We felt that this was another hot HR topic that could help bring some helpful information to our participants. As with all of our webinars, these topics are relatively large, and in the time frame we have, we can only touch certain aspects of it. So this is not the end all of the discussion and the topic today. So I have a question for each of you. Would you consider your job or workplace a place of refuge? A place that is there to accept you as you are and ready to propel you forward toward success? If you have that support, that is a fantastic thing. For many, however, including minorities, people of color, women, people with varying disabilities, and members of the LGBTQ+ community, that's all too often not the case. Diversity and inclusion is more than policies, programs, or headcounts. Equitable employers outpace their competition by respecting their team members' unique needs, perspectives, and potential. As a result, diverse and inclusive workplaces earn their employees deeper trust and are more committed. We need to create workplaces and environments that provide a safe and productive space for growth, progress, and success for all. That's ultimately what diversity, equity, and inclusion seeks to achieve. For every individual in an organization, not to only have access to the same opportunities as others, but to feel a sense of value, belonging, and importance that increases engagement and yields more remarkable results, both at the individual and corporate level. Today's objectives include: what is diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why is diversity important? We'll cover some diversity and laws. And then lastly, we'll end with diversity, equity, and inclusion workplace best practices. Tom, I'm just going to ask again if you can see my screen. I saw a flash there.
Yeah, everything's good, Chris. Looks good.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about the history of DEI. While we tend to think that DEI is a new initiative, it's actually been in the workplace culture for over 60 years. And while we can probably go back a little further, we're kind of focused on the 1960s and beyond. The field of DEI in corporate America has its roots in the 1960s, beginning as a result of the anti-discrimination legislation of the decade, the Equal Pay Act of 1963, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and the Age Discrimination Employment Act of 1967. Efforts were focused on affirmative action and non-discrimination. Diversity representation in the workplace started to become part of the conversation, at least for large corporations. The 1970s through the 1990s, many Fortune 500 companies began concerted efforts in diversity hiring. Although still with a compliance focus, it was about casting a wide net to attract a broader pool of talent. Part of that new talent pool now included Generation X as they began entering the workforce in the mid-1980s, impacting organizational cultures. The 1990s to 2000s, consumer brands have started to realize the value of a diverse workforce that mirrors their customer base. This internal diversity can have a business impact, providing people with a voice and input in the organization's products and services. The 2000s to 2015, inclusion becomes the focus. Organizational efforts center around advancement of a diverse workforce, promotion and development opportunities, as well as diversity among leaderships and boards of directors. By the early 2000s, Gen Y, millennials, enter the workforce with new and different expectations of work. There's research and preliminary finding on unconscious bias and its impact on inclusion. 2015 till today, equity is added to diversity and inclusion, originating from a gender-based equal pay impetus. Given the political climate in the US, the DEI pendulum is swung back a bit, again, being focused on anti-discrimination. Gen Z is entering the workforce, which are 50% non-white and idealistic. They are looking for employers who have a positive impact on society. Diversity. What is diversity? Diversity is the presence of differences that may include race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, gender identity, religion, language, age, marital status, veteran status, mental ability and physical ability, and people with disabilities. What is equity? Equity promotes justice, impartially and fairness within institutions or systems, procedures, processes, and the distribution of resources. Tackling equity issues, understanding the root cause of outcome disparities within our society. Equity aims to assure for the fair treatment, access, equality of opportunity, and advancement for everybody, while also attempting to identify and remove the barriers that have prevented some groups from fully participating. Equity is often used interchangeably with equality, but there's a core difference. Where equality is a system in which each individual is offered the same opportunity, regardless of circumstance, equity distributes resources based on needs. We live in a disproportionate society, and equity tries to correct its imbalance by creating more opportunities for people who have historically had less access. I think that we should also talk about justice when we talk about equity. It is the mission of equity, in which an equitable system works so well, it eventually eliminates the systemic problems driving the need for the latter. In other words, everything is fairly and evenly distributed to people, no matter their race, gender, physical ability, or other personal circumstances. Where D&I focuses on making all groups feel welcome, DEI also addresses the systemic ways access to things such as education, food, and more are all unequally distributed. What is inclusion? Inclusion builds a culture where everybody feels welcome by actively inviting every person or every group to contribute and to participate. This inclusive and welcoming environment supports and embraces differences and offers respect to everyone in words and actions. A work environment that is inclusive, that's inclusive is supportive, respectful, and collaborative, and aims to get all employees to participate and contribute. An inclusive work environment endeavors to remove all barriers, discrimination, and intolerance. Belonging infers that equitable structures in place and functioning to make all people, no matter their difference, feel welcome. When you reach for equity, you're striving for a system that benefits everyone, no matter their circumstance. Belonging is when this not only works, but no one feels if their inclusion is questioned. So we're going to take our first poll here, and let me just launch this really quickly. And all right, so is DEI a topic in your organization? Okay. All right, yeah, I've got some varied answers, but the majority, almost 3/4 say yes, they do. It is a topic in their organization. So very good. Thank you for participating. So why is diversity important? Employee engagement, utilizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Having a diverse workforce means happier and healthier employers. Customers feel more respected, and managers have greater access to talent and skill sets they need for their organization to thrive. A study from Harvard Business Review found that diverse companies have a 19% higher innovation revenue. Disruption and innovation. The coming together of people of different ethnicities with different experiences in cities and societies is a key driver of innovation. The food that we eat every day is a result of this blending of cultures. The most successful musical genres, such as jazz, rock and roll, or hip hop, are the products of cultural amalgamation. If we look at the most innovative, disruptive, and prosperous urban centers in the world, New York, Dubai, London, and Singapore, they all have one thing in common. They are all international melting pots with a high concentration of immigrants. Research shows that there is a direct correlation between high-skilled immigration and an increase in the level of innovation and economic performance in those cities and regions. It is required for recruiting. You're missing out on talent if you're not reaching different demographics in the communities that you serve. The definition of diversity and inclusion can be interpreted in many ways. Still, at its core, it's the understanding that everybody's unique and should be respected for their differences. This includes race, ethnicity, gender, identity, sexual orientation, social economic status, religion, age, and abilities. There's a lot of evidence in the favor of having a diverse and inclusive workforce, not only in terms of creating new ideas, but also creating an attractive environment for job seekers. By 2025, estimates predict that the workforce will be 75% millennials, which will continue to be another driving force for DEI. The segment of this workforce highly values diversity, and with a 2016 survey reporting that 47% of millennials actively look for diversity in their workplace, meaning that diversity should also be a primary concern for organizations looking to attract the best and brightest employees. Diversity in the law. There's a few things that I wanted to discuss with you today in regards to diversity and either recent or proposed legislation, including for pay transparency, the Crown Act, Bostock versus Clayton County, and artificial intelligence and algorithmic fairness initiatives. So we're going to take another poll here. And so let me launch this for us. All right. Do you ask candidates to disclose their salary history? All right, so that's kind of all over the board here. So about a third is yes, a third is no, and a third is they're not sure. So yeah, very good. So so pay transparency. As of November 1st of this year, employers in New York City will be required to post a salary range for every job opening they have, including promotions and transfers. This is a result of a bill passed by New York City Council in September of last year. New York City is following in the footsteps of several states that have shifted the responsibility onto employers, not the employee, to ensure folks are being paid fairly. There are currently 17 states in the US that have laws around pay transparency. Generally speaking, these laws allow employees to freely discuss their pay without fear of retaliation from their employer. And as I had done in previous webinars, all of my sources and resources and tools are included as resource links at the end of this presentation. So if you'd like to get a copy of the presentation and a copy of those links, please reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get those. For example, most pay transparency laws work to prevent pay discrimination and provide employees with the ability to discuss their salaries. However, in recent years, more states are starting to enact and amend laws to include salary disclosure as an essential part of their pay transparency laws. It's no surprise that California is the first state on the transparency list. California was the first state in the US to legally require employers to provide the pay range for a job if the candidate asks for it after the first interview. Employers cannot request salary history and must disclose salary ranges. Passed in 2016 and updated annually, the California's Equal Pay Act prevents employees from asking about candidates' previous salaries and was the first law to use the phrase substantially similar work in regards to gender pay parity. Colorado is also another state that went into effect in January of 2021. And their Equal Pay Work Act requires employers to list a pay range and benefits for every job opening, even if you have one employee working in Colorado. You're required to post pay for any remote job that could potentially be performed in that state. Employers must also notify current employees of all promotion opportunities and keeping records of job descriptions and wages. So now let's talk about the Crown Act. The Crown Act is a law that forbids discrimination based on hair texture and hairstyles. CROWN stands for Create a Respectful and Open Workplace for Natural Hair. Hair discrimination impacts Black people, especially Black women and girls in schools and workplaces who wear hairstyles such as locks, braids, twists, bantu knots, afros, and natural hair. While there's still so much work to be done to pass the law nationwide, progress has been made. The Crown Act Coalition sponsored the Crown Act, SB 188 in California, introduced by Senator Holly Mitchell, and California was the first state to sign the Crown Act into law on July 3rd, 2019. The Crown Act and laws inspired by the Crown Act have been enacted in 19 states: California, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Colorado, Washington, Maryland, Connecticut, Delaware, New Mexico, Nebraska, Nevada, Oregon, Illinois, Maine, Tennessee, and Louisiana. The last three were just enacted this year. Additional bills are awaiting the government. Alaska as well in 2022. And additional bills are awaiting the governor's signature in Alaska and Illinois. In 2021, Illinois' original bill, Senate Bill 3616, was a protection for schools only. The new amendment to SB 3616 would add the protection of workplaces as well. On March 18th of 2022, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Crown Act, and if a companion bill passes in the Senate, it would make hair discrimination based on the texture of natural hair illegal under Title 6 and 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act, and other federal civil rights laws. So DEI in the law. In 2020, the Supreme Court ruled in Bostock versus Clayton County that discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity constitutes discrimination because of sex in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President Biden reaffirmed and applied these protections by issuing an executive order preventing and combating discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation. Affirmed that an employer who fires an individual merely for being gay or transgender violates Title VII's prohibition against sex discrimination. Previously, prohibitions on sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination were limited to state and local laws. Here is what the Department of Labor says on discrimination, including harassment based on gender identity or expression and sex discrimination. The department's policies reaffirms DOL's commitment to the fair treatment and equal opportunity of all people. Policies prohibiting discrimination based on transgender status, gender identity, or gender expression creates the reasonable expectation of an environment where all employees and applicants by employment are evaluated by their performance rather than by their gender identity or expression or other perceptions thereof. In 2020, the Supreme Court in Bostock versus Clayton County affirmed this interpretation, cementing protections for transgender and non-binary workers. Studies have shown that transgender and non-binary people face disproportionate amounts of discrimination in all areas of life, notably in employment. A 2015 study by the National Center for Transgender Equality indicated that 77% of transgender respondents who had a job in the preceding year reported taking steps to avoid mistreatment at work, such as hiding their gender transition at work and quitting their job. In the same study, nearly half, 47%, said they did not ask their employee to refer them with the correct pronouns out of fear of discrimination. Non-binary respondents, 66%, were nearly twice as likely to avoid asking to be referred by their correct pronouns compared to transgender men and women. These statistics underscore the importance of the department's creating a safe environment for all of its employees. Here's what the EEOC says about sexual orientation and gender identity. The law forbids sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination when it comes to any aspect of employment, including hiring, firing, pay, job assignments, promotions, layoffs, training, fringe benefits, and any other term or condition of employment. It is unlawful to subject an employee to workplace harassment that creates a hostile work environment based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Harassment can include, for example, offensive or derogatory remarks about sexual orientation. While this is a complicated landscape, 20 states and DC have laws that explicitly prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. The Equal Opportunity Employment Commission and a growing number of federal courts have extended protections to include sexual orientation and gender identity, especially through Title VII's prohibition on discrimination based on sex. All right, so one last poll question. And so let me bring that up. And this question is, are you using artificial intelligence to make employment decisions? Okay, also, yeah, so look again, kind of across the board here, a third said yes, a third said no, and a third are not sure. The reason that we asked this question is there is new legislation in progress on the use of our artificial intelligence. Let me share those results. Stop sharing there. Artificial Intelligence and Algorithmic Fairness Initiative. In 2021, the U.S. Equal Opportunity Commission, the EOC, Chair Charlotte Burrows launched an agency-wide initiative to ensure the use of software, including in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other emerging technologies used in hiring and other employment decisions complying with the Federal Civil Rights Act that the EEOC enforces. While AI systems may offer new opportunities for employers, they also have the potential to discriminate. Through the initiative, the EEOC will examine more closely how existing and developing technologies fundamentally change the way employment decisions are made. The initiative's goal is to guide employers, employees, job applicants, and vendors to ensure that these technologies are used fairly and consistently with federal equal employment opportunity laws. How could an employer's use of AI decision-making tools violate the ADA? The employer does not provide a reasonable accommodation that is necessary for a job applicant or employee to be rated fairly and accurately by the algorithm. The employer relies on an algorithmic decision-making tool that intentionally or unintentionally screens out an individual with a disability, even though that individual is able to do the job with a reasonable accommodation. Screen out occurs when a disability prevents a job applicant or employee from meeting or lowers their performance on a selection criterion, and that the applicant or employee loses a job opportunity as a result. The employer adopts an algorithmic decision-making tool for use with its job applicants or employees that violates the ADA's restriction on disability-related inquiries and medical examinations. Is an employer responsible under the ADA for its use of algorithmic decision-making tools, even if the tools are designated or administered by another entity, such as a software vendor? In many cases, yes. For example, if an employer administers a pre-employment test, it may be responsible for ADA discrimination if the test discriminates against individuals with disabilities, even if the test was developed by an outside vendor. In addition, employers may be held responsible for the actions of their agents, which may include entities such as software vendors, and if the employer has given them authority to act on the employer's behalf. So this law could really affect many organizations, right? Many HR systems today have started to include AI or machine learning, helping you with some of these tasks, specifically in recruiting. But there are going to be more guidance and more rules coming around using these tools to make sure that they don't violate the ADA. And so, you know, we need to keep an eye on what's happening with AI and how it's going to be affecting your organization. So we see New York City proposes a rule on automated employment decision tools. So New York City has released proposed regulations in advance of the new law's effective date of January 1st, 2023. The law regulates the use of automated decision tools on candidates and employees residing in New York City. The law defines such tools as any computational process derived from machine learning, statistical modeling, data analytics, or artificial intelligence that issues simplified output, including a score, classification, or recommendation that is used to substantially assist or replace discretionary decision-making for making employment decisions that impact natural persons. An employer is prohibited from using an AI tool in making employment decisions unless the tool has been subject to a bias audit by an independent auditor within the prior year, and a summary of audit results and distribution data for the tool have been made publicly available on the employer or employment agency's website. Okay, so this law goes into effect January 1st of 2023 for those of you that are in New York. Now, obviously, there are more laws and regulations out there. We're only covering a few of them today, but something to be aware of. So DEI workplace best practices. You know, we should hold leaders accountable for advancing diversity. While stating that you want to hire more Black employees or promote more women might be well-intentioned, you won't make much progress without enlisting the support of senior executives. A growing number of companies, including Salesforce, Nike, Starbucks, and McDonald's, are doing just that by tying executive compensation to meeting diversity targets. Take the necessary time to source a diverse group of candidates. Recruiters are often under pressure to fill roles quickly, but sourcing candidates from unrepresented groups can take time. If you're looking to go fast, your candidate pool is likely not to be as diverse. Focus on skills and not schools. If you're evaluating job seekers based on the degrees they have and the schools they attended, there's a good chance that you're missing out on desirable candidates from unrepresented groups. Adopt a diverse candidate slate policy. How can you open the door to groups that have been shut out in the past? One way is to adopt a diverse candidate slate policy that requires a certain number of people from diverse backgrounds be considered for any given job. Some companies provide incentives to their employees who refer candidates from unrepresented groups. For instance, Intel employees who successfully refer a woman, a veteran, or an individual from an unrepresented group receives a $4,000 bonus, double the standard payout for referrals. If your workplace doesn't sound inclusive, candidates will likely take a pass. Gender-coded language like dominate or rock star might dissuade women from applying. Listing too many job requirements can also be a turnoff for candidates from unrepresented groups. A LinkedIn study found that women apply to 20% fewer jobs than men and often believe that candidates need to have all the job requirements to be considered for the job. So in conclusion, align your DEI initiatives to corporate strategy. Build an actionable plan with goals suited to your business and workforce. Ensure that your leaders are aligned with your DEI initiatives. Communicate your DE&I strategy to employees. Leverage data insights and analytics to gain visibility and awareness of the diversity of your workforce. Using these modern tools that are available and in many HR systems today can give you that visibility and that diversity, salary ranges, promotions, positions, and so don't let the pay transparency and the AI dissuade you from using that information. There's a lot of good, valuable information there. We just have to use that information correctly. Identify barriers to recruitment and promotion. And then, of course, monitor state and local legislation and regulatory efforts, because they'll continue to change, and you should monitor those in your program to ensure compliance. All right, so I'm going to open this session up for questions. So if you could, in your chat, ask any questions that you have. All right, I don't see any questions. We do appreciate the time you spent with us today on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We ask that you email us if you are looking for resources for your DEI initiatives, or you want a copy of this presentation. And we'll talk to you next time. Thank you very much.